Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the beginning of our summer speaker series, our 2021 speaker series. We're really looking forward to this and I'm glad to have you all with us. My name is Sarah George. I have met some of you and some of you may have seen me here on Zoom during our annual gathering in the fall. I am on the board of directors of CCA, Catholic Committee of Appalachia. I'm currently the vice chair. I've been helping Jeannie out, especially with this speaker series through this summer. For a lot of you, this is the first time we're gathering since the sudden death of our co-coordinator, Michael Iafrate, last month. Several of you noted that your donations were in his honor and memory, so thank you so much for that and for your continued prayers and continued support as we kind of navigate this next chapter of CCA. A couple notes about the format of the evening. We're going to begin with a few moments of prayer. There's going to be an opening prayer and an opportunity to kind of quietly meditate on a couple of quotes that were selected by our speaker tonight, Joe Holland, and we are going to just give a couple of moments of silence to reflect on those quotes and share any thoughts in the chat, and then I'll pass the floor over to our welcome guest this evening, Joe Holland, and then after that there'll be an opportunity for some question and answer. So again, feel free to engage using the chat as much as you feel comfortable. I'd like to thank Jeannie, our fearless leader of CCA, for organizing this speaker series. And of course, I'd like to thank our speaker, Joe Holland, who I will introduce after our opening prayer. So as I mentioned, our opening prayer is going to be utilizing a few quotes that were selected by Joe from the pastoral that we're going to be discussing this evening, from This Land is Home to Me. So before we get into that, I will share my screen and share some visuals with those quotes. But before we do that, let's just take a moment to center ourselves and open with prayer. God of all creation, we thank you for this opportunity to gather in prayer, reflection, listening, learning, and experiencing the first Appalachian pastoral letter together. We thank you for the wisdom contained in these letters and how they have shaped our work in this region. Thank you for Joe, for his insight, for his prophetic voice, for his willingness to share and teach and learn with us. Open our hearts to the wisdom we can gain from this time together and the ways it can shape us, our hearts, the work we do, the lives we live, seeking justice for Earth, for Appalachia, and for her people. We ask this in the name of Jesus, our brother, and the Holy Spirit, our liberator. Amen. As I mentioned, feel free to utilize the chat as I share these quotes. If there is a word that sticks out to you, or a thought or an experience that comes to mind, if you're feeling moved to change in some way, if there's anything you'd like to share, feel free to share those movements of your heart or thoughts that these quotes bring forth in the chat. Maximization of profit in today's world has become a crazy death wish, every day using up more and more of the earth's riches and our own dignity. Like those who write spy thrillers, the process is fascinated with everything that can self-destruct, even if it is ourselves. Maximization of profit in today's world has become a crazy death wish, every day using up more and more of the earth's riches and our own dignity. Like those who write spy thrillers, the process is fascinated with everything that can self-destruct, even if it is ourselves. If our present system keeps on growing and growing, it will burn us up and our world. If our present system keeps on growing and growing, it will burn us up and our world. But the children of the mountains have fought for a different way. Their struggles and their poetry together keep alive a dream, a tradition, a longing, a promise, which is not just their dream, but the voiceless vision buried beneath life's bitterness wherever it is found. They sing of a life free and simple, with time for one another and for people's needs, based on the dignity of the human person, at one with nature's beauty, crowned by poetry. But the children of the mountains have fought for a different way. Their struggles and their poetry together keep alive a dream, a tradition, a longing, a promise, which is not just their dream, but the voiceless vision buried beneath life's bitterness wherever it is found. They sing of a life free and simple, with time for one another and for people's needs, based on the dignity of the human person, at one with nature's beauty, crowned by poetry. One comment shared in the chat from Jeannie, I think was about the previous quote about burning up us and our world, which is very prophetic, especially seeing as this document was written in 1975, and now we are really facing the effects of climate change. Thank you all for taking the time to center ourselves in a little bit of quiet meditation on those quotes. Now I would like to introduce Joe Holland, our honored and welcome speaker this evening. Joe Holland is an emeritus professor of philosophy and religion at St. Thomas University. Joe is an eco-social philosopher and radical traditional Catholic theologian, exploring the correlative breakdowns of modern bourgeois industrial civilization and modern bourgeois psychological spirituality, as well as the correlative need for a regeneratively postmodern ecological civilization and a regeneratively postmodern ecological spirituality. Joe is emeritus professor of philosophy and religion at St. Thomas University in Miami Gardens, Florida, and a still active adjunct professor in its School of Law, permanent visiting professor at the Universidad Nacional del Altiplano in Puno, Peru, president of Pax Romano, Catholic Movement for Intellectual and Cultural Affairs, USA, and editor of its Pacem in Terris Press, with both based in Washington, D.C., vice chair of Catholic Scholars for Worker Justice, based in Boston, Massachusetts, a member of the board of directors of the Human Rights Institute at St. Thomas University School of Law in Miami Gardens, Florida, a member of the International Society for the Study of Religion, Nature, and Culture, based in Delaware, Ohio, and a member of the International Association for Catholic Social Thought, based at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. Joe has published 18 books and many articles. He was also the consultant writer with lots of help from visionary figures in the Catholic Committee of Appalachia for the 1975 document that we're here to discuss, This Land is Home to Me, a pastoral letter on powerlessness in Appalachia by the Catholic bishops of the region, and for the 1995 document, At Home in the Web of Life, a pastoral message from the Catholic bishops of Appalachia on sustainable communities. Joe is married to his wife, Paquita, who is also here with us this evening, who is a native of Puerto Rico, and they have 2 grown children and 4 young grandchildren. His 2 infrequent hobby is sailing, especially in the beautiful green waters of the Caribbean Sea. Without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and give the floor to Joe.
Where am I? Okay, there. Thank you, Jeannie. And Jeannie, Sarah, and Jeannie, thank you, both of you. It's great to be here again. I went through my files and I found a talk I'd given at the 40th anniversary of CCA back in, I think it was 2010, a while ago. So, looking at these quotes we put up there, you know, back then we were worried about those things in the future, and now it is actually burning up. We really are into the process. It's sort of spooky, huh? I wanted to begin by sharing with you a photo that I think Jeannie sent me. I think, if I recall correctly. Let's see if I got it here. There, can I? Oh, I got to share my screen though. I think I can do that, right? 1 second. Share screen. Oh, can you, Sarah? Can you give me permission to share screen? Actually, I'm going to need that for some other things too.
Sure, I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay. Try again. Yeah, okay, let me get the right one up there on the screen. There, I found this picture. There's Carol. Okay. If I can remember, this is Bishop Walter Sullivan here, who was a signer, the last living signer of the first pastoral letter, Bishop of Richmond, Virginia, wonderful guy. He was the chaplain of Pax Christi and a great fighter against war and violence. And then he played a major role in the second pastoral letter, huh? And of course, here's the famous Beth Davies. I jokingly said, when the first pastoral was written, it was really Les Schmidt who was telling me what to write. But then I found out it was Beth Davies who was telling Les what to tell me. And I'm sorry, I forget this person's name. Jeannie, can you help out? A name there? No, okay. Anyway, Carol
might be able to know that one better. Yeah, Carol might know that one.
Carol, do you remember?
Carolyn Brink. It was just typed.
I wasn't sure of all the names.
Okay, this is Carol. Here's Carol Warren right here.
Yeah.
She hasn't changed very much either, Paquita, the two.
Yes.
And me. And Evelyn Detling and Todd Garland. And this was, I think, was Mike. Anybody else remember the last name? No, okay.
Michael Vincent?
Yes.
Michael Vincent, yeah.
And here?
Steve Kalecki.
Oh, Steve Kalecki, yes. I actually had an email from him just the other day. Wow. And of course, the famous Marie Cirillo and Marcus Keyes, and he and his wife Glenda, we've both been very close to for over the years. Yeah. So this was a photograph, but probably from the second pastoral, I'm guessing, but I just didn't want to share that. It brought back a lot of memories. This second thing, I wanted to just quote some things from the 40th anniversary presentation I made, which Todd Garland recorded and very magnanimously tried to transcribe, but it was a little bit incomprehensible. And we both worked on it for a long time, but never quite got together a coherent text. But the beginning of it, at least, was coherent. But this, I think, I would argue, is at the root of the great crises that we face now. The loss, forgetfulness of the immanent divine presence within creation, which I'll say more about. And I use the word bourgeois because bourgeois just means urban, but the modern world rose out of urban classes. They were neither the rural peasantry nor the rural aristocracy, both of whom understood nature very well, but the people in the cities and the towns didn't understand nature, and they built a world that was increasingly tried to be without nature, and they wound up destroying nature. But anyway, I just want to read a few things there. And there's one funny story is that Les Schmidt and John Barry, now deceased, both Glenmary priests, came to the Center of Concern, and because we were involved with liberation theology, and I'd been living in Chile before that, and knew a lot of the liberation theologians, they decided we could write this pastoral letter from a liberation theology perspective. So Les was assigned to work with me, and I did a draft, and he said, "That's very nice," and he threw it in the wastebasket. And then he gave me a version of, I think it was Populorum Progressio done in the way Peter Morin would write easy essays. And he said, "Write it like this." And I said, "Okay, I'll try that. I'll do my best." But I should say that in the writing, the pastoral was filled with thoughts that I did not have before I went into dialogue. We did a lot of dialoguing around the region and listening and learning. So it really was the fruit of learning. It was I couldn't have possibly written that stuff until I learned from the people of CCA and the people of the region. But just to hear, I want to read this first part here. This is about the early lessons about the valiant and strong women of Appalachia. I first learned that when European or European American colonists initially settled the Appalachian region, they were mostly male soldiers who had fought in the War of Independence. The new government had promised them if they would fight, they would receive a pension after the war was over. But after the war, the government had no money and so could not pay the promised pensions. Instead, the government gave them land in the mountains of the region of Appalachia. But of course, it was not unoccupied land, it was Indian territory. Before the War of Independence, the English colonial powers had a relatively good relationship with the Native Americans or original peoples of the region. And they had agreed that the colonists would not be allowed to go so far as west as the Appalachian Mountains. These mountains and beyond were for the English to remain Indian territory. But after the War of Independence, many of the colonial elite, dreaming of a great American empire, and they thought about it early on, had other plans for the mountains and beyond. And so they sent these young men to settle the mountains, and they had to fight Indians out there. However, as I say, there were no female soldiers with them, and they weren't always fighting, and they fell in love with many of the Indian women, and the cultures began to mix, and they married many of the Indian women. I had not originally known that many of them were fortunate enough to marry wonderful Native American women, especially from the great Cherokee Nation. The traditions within the Cherokee Nation, as well as other Native American traditions, supported strong, valiant women. As a result, to this day, Appalachia has a rich tradition of strong, valiant, and strong women whose strength flows powerfully from Native American roots. The strength of these women, Appalachian women, was later reinforced by the arrival of strong religious and lay missionary women, Catholic sisters who came to the mountains. The gift of all these women are a special part of the blessing that is Appalachia today. And other women too, who came to the mountains like Jeannie, who were not necessarily, were very spiritual, but not, quotes, religious. And then secondly, the central theme of the immanent divine presence in creation. I won't read all that to you, but this is what really is the gaping hole in modern Western culture here, and been, I think, deliberately repressed. Okay. So here's what I'd like to do with you kind of quickly and run through it. That won't take too long, I hope. But I would argue that we're facing a turning point of three crises in Earth history, human history, and Catholic history. And just I'd like to use in very terse form the See, Judge, Act method, plus a little note at the end about each of these. First, we're at a turning point in Earth history, and I'm going to be drawing here on Tom Barry, who is, I'm sure, Thomas Barry. I'm sure many of you know his work. But I'd like to use a phrase that I don't know if it was coined by, but was very central to Rachel Carson in her when she wrote the book, The Silent Spring. She kept writing, referring to it as a war on nature. And she spoke of it especially as a chemical war. And I think that's correct. It comes out of what I call a hyper masculine warrior consciousness that was a further development from the patriarchal warrior consciousness of the classical civilizations and the medieval period. It was even worse, I think. And I won't get into that, but it really is our technology, technoscience is designed in the modern Western world out of this consciousness of warring against nature. Can be traced back to people like Francis Bacon, but he didn't invent it. It was much broader. Bacon was the Lord Chancellor of England during Elizabethan times. He also was part of a war against Ireland at the same time that the war against the Native Americans was going on by the English. But we are now into, I think, already beginning to go into in this decade. This is a pivotal decade for what's going to happen to the earth and to humans and everything, to the entire biosphere. And we may trip these tripping points during this decade, unless we make radical changes. I'm fairly pessimistic about it, but I have to say a few recent developments of disinvesting from fossil fuels and pushing governments to turn away from fossil fuels. Maybe we have a fighting chance in this decade. But if we don't do that, these tipping points will bring catastrophic devastation of the planetary biosphere in the sequential decades after, as we go into the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I won't get into what they all are. I'm sure you're familiar with that. In my analysis, the deep root, the deep mythic symbolic root of why that's happened is I say the loss, but it's really has been historically the repression, what I would call the primal eco-feminine spirituality immanence. Even in the early Christian tradition, there are echoes of this, that even Augustine in the late classical era, and much more the Eastern churches, spoke of the book of nature, that the Creator had given us two books, the book of the Bible and the book of nature. And you could only read the book of the Bible against the horizon of the book of nature. But the modern world lost the book of nature, both initially in Catholic and later in Protestant forms. They lost the centrality. And that is because the modern world was run by the bourgeoisie, which simply means the people who lived in the towns and the cities. And they didn't live in Appalachia. If they lived in Appalachia, they would never lost it. They lived in like New York City or London, or Paris. And they just began to think that they could replace nature with modern technoscience, with artificial products of human technology. They could replace the really lush and fertile regeneration of nature with the constant, incessant mechanical production of sterile technologies. And the result has been catastrophic. The result is we're either going to destroy the world rapidly by nuclear war, or what would be a slow motion nuclear war that we're already into is ecological devastation. What we need to do, I think, is, and it is beginning, but it just has to happen so much more dramatically, especially in the universities, which I think are the major culpable institutions. We need some kind of authentically, by being ecologically postmodern, I don't use the word postmodern in the academic sense of it, global ecological renaissance, in which we really, as Thomas Berry pointed out, and the last great book, major book of his life, The Great Work, I think is our tremendous guide for that. Now, and just a note at the end, Appalachia, I believe, has incredible cultural resources to make for this. Places like Appalachia have to be in the intellectual, spiritual leadership in the future, and how to do that and so on is another story. But I really believe that we need leadership from the margins, which are really not the margins, but they're the roots. Pope Francis constantly talks of the margins. Okay, turning point in human history. I'm writing a book now called The Ecological Failure of Modern Philosophy. Romano Guardini, a famous Italian-German Catholic, this very distinguished Catholic philosopher in the middle years of the 20th century, was a close friend of all the great Western European thinkers of that time. He wrote a book in German called Das Ende der Neuzeit, the end of the modern world. the end of the modern world. And that's what, saying it was coming, well, it's now here. It is collapsing. Modernity, and I take that as a cycle from about 500 years, from 1500 up to 2000. And Earth scientists have begun to, and others following them have begun to describe this as the Anthropocene epoch, where human presence is really altering the fundamental geology of the planet as well as the chemistry and biology of the planet. And that is leading to the collapse of industrial civilization. Thomas Berry spoke even more dramatically. It's the collapse, he argued, of the 66 million year old Cenozoic era following the extinction of the dinosaurs that led to a tremendous explosion of life and beauty all across the planet. It is revealing a failure of both modern ideologies of materialism, which share common philosophical roots in the ancient classical philosopher Epicurus, who shouldn't have to bear the blame for all of that. But what the moderns did with Epicurean philosophy was rather bizarre. But both liberalism or liberal capitalism and Marxism or scientific socialism, and there are many forms, and they have many varieties, are really now bankrupt before this. So we need an entirely fresh ecological, intellectual and spiritual foundation for a new civilization. The loss of human consciousness that we are part of nature, which is just another form of this modern loss of the primal ecofeminine spirituality, immanence, I say, is the root of it. And the person who I found most resourceful for that is Charlene Spretnak, who's a Catholic ecofeminist philosopher who's written a number of very wonderful books, and one of whose books inspired the foundation of the Green Party in the United States. Strategy that I've been drawn to is that we need to expand the global network of eco-villages. But I see eco-villages not as separate enclaves in isolation, but as, fortunately, Sarah held up the book. Maybe Sarah, you could hold up that book again, although I have it someplace right here handy. Well, it'll take me a few minutes to find it. Anthony Flaccavento's book. Sarah, are you there? Sarah is that right there? Can you read out the full name of the book for us, Sarah? Yeah.
Building a Healthy Economy from the Bottom Up, Harnessing Real-World Experience for Transformative Change by Anthony Flacavento.
I think this book is really a Bible for the grounding, economic and political grounding, as well as cultural of a new civilization again. Yeah. If eco-villages would ground themselves in that, as Anthony was involved in Southwest Virginia, and regenerating the entire county. They did wonderfully. They had great success in that until they got to the borders and they met the state legislature and the federal legislature. And the state governments and the national government, of course, backed up by corporate lobbyists, make it impossible for this kind of a society. But the local people, who you might think of right-wing rednecks and so on, in fact, we're very open to this kind of and by the way, rednecks is a very positive term. It was a name because in the great Coal Wars, the Italian immigrants and the local people wore red bandanas when they were actually engaged in armed warfare with the state police and the militia. So it's not a reactionary term, rednecks. It doesn't. But Anthony's book, I really can't recommend that highly enough. Okay. And I think new developments in Catholic social ecological teaching, I call it, not just social teaching, and Laudato Si takes us very far in that direction. We can maybe go a little further beyond Laudato Si, I think, but Laudato Si is a great opening of the door to it. So that the turning point in human history. Lastly, the turning point in Catholic history. I was very fascinated. Like Cardinal Marx, of Germany. I don't know if you saw the press. He's about 67, I think, and bishops are supposed to retire when they're 75. So that would be 8 years before retirement. And he's one of Pope Francis's top advisors. He wanted to throw in the towel. He wanted to resign and to dedicate himself to more grassroots work. because he said the Roman Catholic Church, and here I want to point out, there are 24 Catholic churches in the world, but the Roman Catholic Church has been the ally of Western imperialism since the time of Charlemagne, and it got all the prizes. And it suppressed the other churches. It tried to pretend that all the other churches were ethnic churches and had no responsibility for global evangelization, because it wanted all the colonial territories, its leaders. But the other 23 Catholic churches are very resourceful. So I think we're going to see the Roman Church declining, and the other 24 Catholic churches begin. And in fact, that's already beginning to happen. A lot of people are beginning to join the East. The second largest one is the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, but there are many more, including all the way back to Ur of the Chaldees, the Chaldean Catholic Church. But Cardinal Marx had said, we just have run into a dead end. He was really hopeless. But he thought that the emptiness of hopelessness could be the place from which new life would be born. He wasn't giving up hope, but he thought the present institutional form of the Catholic Church really is hopeless. And I believe he's correct in that. The judge, in turn, the judge think we really have tremendous new energies from prophetic, ecological, feminist liberation of theologies and spiritualities. And we have Lee Cormie here, who was the mentor to Michael. And you have that stream well and alive in Appalachia. That's wonderful. I would say two things here. I meant one, we need to create a new stage of what has been called, but I don't refer it to that way, a new stage of the religious order, which will be lay and ecological. And Peter Morin spoke about this. That was really his vision. And agronomic, I would prefer to call it agroecological communities. And when he spoke of communes, he was not talking about a hippie or a little eco village in isolation, but he was like Anthony Flacavento, talking about the whole community. Commune in French, and Peter Morin was French, was meant a village, eventually could be a big village like the Paris Commune, but it was really meant a village. And Peter himself came from a local, we had ecological villages, they're nothing new. That was the way humans lived for about 10,000 years. So we can go back to them and we can equip them with satellite dishes and solar collectors and all that stuff. But the cities have to shrink. I'm not opposed to cities, but they have to be shrink and become at the service of the rural regeneration, which would be through eco villages, which is the ancient form of human organization. I just want to have if anyone wants to follow up on this, I've been doing a lot of publishing later. It's 18 books. One of the reasons I've been able to publish a lot recently through my organization, Pax Romana, we created our own publishing company, because I was finding it was very difficult to get Catholic publishers to take any of this thought seriously. It's very hard to get this stuff reviewed. And I have to say, Commonweal, National Catholic Reporter, America, they're not doing a very good, they're still in the modern framework. They're still like the proverbial fish that swims in the water, but it's not even aware the water's there. They're still swimming in the water of modernity, and they haven't broken outside of that yet. Anyway, so I've been able to do a lot of publishing. These books cost a little bit. Anybody wants a copy of them and can't afford it, I'll be happy to send you digital copies of everything. I can do that. And I'm even thinking now pretty soon, but I don't have too much time, of putting free digital copies on my website, because it's crazy how much these things cost. But I wrote first about Peter Morin's lay monasticism. It became very clear to me that, and I think the Catholic worker has not fully understood this. And I know that because Mabel Gill, who is a dear old friend of mine, I don't know if she's still alive. She was 93 the last time I talked to her. She grew up with Tamar, who was the daughter of Dorothy Day. And Peter Morin tutored Mabel Gill and Tamar in agroecology, what I would call agroecology. Even had sent them out to study at the University in Long Island to study agronomics. And Mabel later became the head of the New York State food task force in the state legislature in Albany. So we used to talk every week, and she said that Peter's vision was very deep, but that most people in the Catholic worker didn't understand it. So that was my first entree into it. And then I finally made a colossal book that if you have any trouble sleeping, 2 pages a night will cure any problems you have with insomnia. But I put all kinds of stuff in it when I'm trying to get things straight. I really wrote it for myself to get all these things straight in my head, postmodern ecological spirituality. And I tried to go through the history and the institutional form of Catholic spirituality, of Western Catholic spiritualities that developed. And out of that, I spun off 2 books. And by the way, well, don't have time to talk about this, but I found the early Irish Celtic, or I should say in the British Isles, because they came from Scotland and England as well as Ireland, the Irish Celtic, but it was predominantly Irish, the Irish Celtic missionary evangelization of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Really, it was not Benedict. It was the Irish Celtic scholars who had never been touched by the Roman Empire, but had ancient connections with Greek and Egyptian Catholicism. And they had kept alive. They were fluent in Greek. The Latins didn't know Greek. St. Augustine could never learn Greek. They had kept alive the tremendous classical intellectual tradition, and they brought it all over Europe. Peter Moran used them as his model. This was the model. And there's a book of Irish monasticism, about Irish Celtic monasticism, that is in, oh gosh, I should have pulled it out. Anyways, in his bibliography, and that was his primary resource. Not a single scholar of Peter Moran or the Catholic worker has ever referred to that book. But that's the key to Peter's vision. And I mentioned it in the book about Peter Moran. Anyway, this early lay Catholic monasticism, and it was not monasticism as we know it. The so-called monks were married, the abbots were married. It was really a tribal or clan-based model of Catholicism. That's what it was. It had its problems. It was not perfect, and as time went on, it became problematic. But the Roman Church deliberately suppressed it. I could explain the various stages by which they suppressed it, but they wiped it out and replaced it with continental European orders. Out of that, though, it became very clear to me that the first problem with the Western Church in this regard, with all of Catholicism, was from the 4th century, when the Constantinian alliance with the empire, the integration of the empire and the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Empire, and the establishment of clericalism. Clericalism is not evangelical. It's absolutely anti-evangelical. It's very different from ordination. And the reason the evangelical churches are so successful, even though I dislike their theology very much. I taught in 3 evangelical seminaries in my life, and they make wonderful pastors, and they are lay. That's the secret of why they evangelize successfully. Clericalism is the biggest obstacle to evangelization we have, and it's institutional, it's not psychological. But the Pope and everybody else wants to make it out as psychological. So I wrote this book on Roman Catholic clericalism. And secondly, I wrote this other one, The Next Stage of Religious Life. And this is where I began to try to unpack what Peter Moran was talking about and make some recommendations for it. I could just kind of hold these up for you if you wish. Here. And again, anyone who wants a copy in digital version, just email me and I'll be happy to send them all to you. This is Peter Moran, the one on Peter Moran. This is the big fat one that'll cure insomnia. And then this is the one I did on Roman Catholic clericalism. And then this is the last one I did, The Next Stage of Catholic Religious Life. So they're all linked together. They're part of a large project. And the present book I'm working on is about the philosophical foundations. And then after that, I want to do another book on the what I call deep reform of the Catholic Church. But I'll stop there. I think that's enough. And let me stop sharing. That's a kind of overview of this project I've been working on. I hope I live long enough to keep going with it. At 81, but unfortunately I'm in very good health. So, And Sarah, I'll turn it back to you for any dialogue or questions or insults or anything else anyone's wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Joe. If anyone has any questions, or I'm going to ask that you keep the insults to yourself. I don't know that would be. But if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share, feel free to unmute yourself. We're a small enough group that I think that would work well. So feel free to unmute yourself, or if you'd like to put something in the chat, feel free to do that as well. Joe, if it's okay with you, I might put your email address in the chat.
Yeah, by all means, yeah.
People do want to contact you and take you up on that.
The one is the one I try to keep certain projects separate. I have 9 emails, but the one office@joe-holland.net.
That's what I've got here. Okay, perfect.
That would be the best one. Then I'll have everything in one place there.
Okay, I just put that in the chat if anyone wants to follow up later with thoughts or questions, or take him up on his offer for digital copies of books.
And that will push me to put them on the website.
There you go. Hi, Carol.
I got a question. Joe, if you had to name just 1 or 2 things from This Land is Home to Me that you felt like were very, very forward-looking and prophetic for the time, what would they be? And do you feel like attention has been paid to those things, or are they still, out there and prophetic, but nobody is doing it?
Thanks, Carol. The 3 quotes really are, but really the first and the second quote go together, and then they're kind of negative, and the third quote is positive. But and these are things I learned. I mean, I didn't go into this project knowing these things. So the things I learned in the process and reading and learning with the dialogues and the consultations. But the first is that we really are an anti-ecological civilization, and it is breaking down. I mean, I think that was somewhat prophetic in 1975. Rachel Carson wrote her book, I don't know, was it 1956 or something? So she was ahead of all of us. But even Tom Berry's work didn't begin to pick up until the 1990s, really. He was quite old when he really got some traction. So I think, yeah, that was not my doing. That was what I heard from, the grassroots in Appalachia. That's what I would not have thought that if I had not been involved in the process. So yeah, we were, because of the stories. I mean, it has been a colony, first a timber colony and then a coal colony, and the people got nothing out of it, and not only they were screwing the people, they were destroying nature, and that was so clear, I remember flying into Wheeling one time for something, and this was later, but and then as the long glide path in, looking down at mountaintop removal, mountain after mountain after mountain. I couldn't believe it. So it was ahead of its time, Appalachia, in being visited by ecological devastation. But that devastation was destined for all of us, I think, yeah. And then secondly, I think the positive thing is the strong feminine presence in Appalachia, and within that feminist presence, the indigenous roots. I really think we have to drink deeply of indigenous spirituality. I mean, if we take the old medieval construct of a kind of hierarchical nature of the natural and the supernatural, well, just to use that for pedagogical purposes, what we have, Christianity as a supernatural spirituality. But as Aquinas says, grace builds on nature, John Paul II had it, one of a very good thing he did. There's some other things weren't so good, but he had an even better translation of that. Grace fulfills nature, he said. So, but if Christianity is our supernatural religion, we still share the indigenous roots of natural religion. That is the indigenous tradition is the natural human religion that our whole human family shares in common. And I think that, like, I would say that history is not like linear trading in your old car and getting a new one for a new stage. It's like a tree, it's organic. The rings of the tree remain. We still have, just as we have the DNA of everything before us still in us, so we still have the past within us, our primal roots, our classical roots. All the historical stuff is still with us. So the indigenous spiritualities of the planet are our foundational spiritualities. And we can handle that in Catholic spirituality. That's, in fact, matter of fact, that's what it always did. One of my students in the law school is Haitian, and she was saying, oh, in Haiti, everybody mixes voodoo with Hades. I said, and I said, well, that's nothing new. I think the Christmas tree was some kind of German tree god, and the Lent was a Greek pagan festival, and Christmas was built on the Roman Saturnalia, and it just goes on and on. The European Christianity and Middle Eastern Christianity and African Christianity, and Slavic Christianity appropriated all, and certainly the Celts did too, all the tribal traditions. They appropriated them and they integrated them. And that was nothing. It was only with the Reformation and the Protestants didn't cause that. It was late medieval Catholics, because I always say Protestantism was a Catholic invention. All its founders were Catholic. The negative attitude toward nature from the Reformation didn't begin with the Reformation. It began in late medieval Catholicism. But that was the modern form of Christianity in the West that rejected. They thought it was all pagan, and that pagan was bad. But traditionally, the Christian of evangelization thought paganism was wonderful, and they always incorporated it, unless it was something like child sacrifice or something, burning people or something. Anyway, so that Appalachia has this indigenous spirituality, and I think the sense of the immanent presence comes much more from the feminine tradition. And in Canada, Heather Booth, who I'm sure Mike Lee knows very well, and that Michael must have known, has written extensively about this. So the negative side, the ecological destruction came first in Appalachia, became visible, but also the beauty of the indigenous tradition at the same time was visible. And so there's a negative and a positive sign that very early on was that I learned from and drank deeply of.
Jeannie had asked a question in the chat. She wrote, what were some of the problems the Irish Celtic tribal Catholics had prior to the Roman Church wiping them out?
Well, over time, there began to, and I'm sure this was true of the tribal or clan traditions everywhere. Originally, they were very communal. There were leaders, and the leaders had authority, but they were accountable to the ordinary people, and land was held in common. I remember an Irish priest telling me, even that when he was a young boy, that the local farmers in his region would still get up and they would divide who would get this parcel and who would get that parcel. The land was still considered community land, and they would, in a very remote rural area of Ireland, and they would still parcel it out within the whole community. It was communal land. But as time went on, class divisions began to arise within the clan. I think this is, and also the undermining of the powerful feminine tradition also happened, and the male warrior and the warring spirit began to develop. That happened in all of the traditions, and I think we saw that even in the Native American traditions of the Americas. It was only, the great empires, Aztec, Toltec, Mayan, Inca, Tiahuanacan, and so on. Those were a minority of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, but they had very hierarchical patriarchal class structures. So I think in the Celtic tradition in the British Isles, and it was all across all the British Isles, the Celtic tradition, that same thing began to happen too. Yeah, but it was obliterated. The first step was that in the Synod of Whitby in the 7th century, I think it was, that they, using Saxon Benedictine monks, they shut down the Celtic church coming out of the northeast of Ireland over into Scotland. The Columban church, they called it, came all the way down into the Midlands of England. And Whitby, that was a battle between the Columban Celtic church and the Benedictine Saxon church, and the Columban abbot, who was kind of presiding over it all, returned to Ireland, and they were famous. They had dual monasteries of women and men, abbesses, and the abbesses and the abbots were equal, and many of them were married, and there were families and stuff there. But that all was put, the Benedictine, now Roman celibate model came in, hierarchical, clerical, and all of that. The Celtic tradition apparently had continued the Druid tradition. That's what it was, the Druid intellectual spiritual tradition. And then, so that was the first one. And then in the so-called Gregorian Reform, which was very, very vicious in the continent, they sent continental religious orders in to destroy the so-called Irish monastic church. I would call it the clan church, and impose the diocesan Roman church. Actually, St. Patrick was sent there to do that first. He didn't get very far. But in the 11th century, the Cistercians were the major forces, and the Augustinians. Those were the two groups that came in to dismantle the Celtic church. And then finally, in the Protestant Reformation, Cromwell just obliterated whatever was left of it. And it was a capital offense to have any written material in the Irish language, and they really wiped it out. The great Irish leader James Connolly later wrote this is when the clan traditions were destroyed in England. And from then on, the intellectuals had to go to the continent, and they studied at Irish colleges in Rome, Leuven, Salamanca, Paris, and they learned the continental European ways and brought that back into Ireland. And eventually, from France, they brought the terrible Jansenism back into the Irish tradition, which was completely foreign to the Celtic church. Yeah. But there was the class divisions and the gender divisions, hierarchy which were infecting everything. They began to infect the Irish tradition.
Linda just wrote in the chat, I seem to recall, but can't find now, a reference in Laudato Si to "This land is home to me."
Is that right? I never saw that. Yeah. I have to go back and look.
Yeah.
Well, I know they cited a lot of pastoral letters by regional Episcopal conferences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I would say that
I'm
Anthony.
sorry, I've got to stay off.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Anthony Floccavento is one of our local gurus, let's say, here in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. So we're very familiar with his work. He collaborates with us in Appalachian Peace Education Center quite a lot. And I'm sorry I have to stay off camera because the connections here in Appalachia to the internet are less than stellar, let's say. But I have another question, and that's with respect to the Poor People's Campaign and whether you're familiar with the third Reconstruction proposal.
Maybe you could speak to it.
That and to my, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Could you speak to it a little? Tell us about it.
Oh, the Poor People's Campaign National Call for Moral Revival is a nationwide movement that has put together a coalition of of people who are pulling together in order for a transformation, really, to transform our society, really, and building from the bottom up. So with a true focus, which includes the poor, which includes, of course, the earth, which Pope Francis oftentimes in Laudato Si refers to the earth as being one of the poor that we need to focus on, and we need to lift up. So the third reconstruction is has recently been there's a House resolution that is 438. It also calls for nuclear disarmament, which is an issue that I work on quite a lot, and has 30 co-sponsors. It's the third reconstruction, fully addressing poverty and low wages from the bottom up. And so income disparity, healthcare disparity, and by the way, Appalachia comes up a lot in the resolution that was recently released in the Congress, and I'll tell you, it is one thing, sir, that gives, and all of you, it's one thing that gives me hope. That and dealing with the good folks at the Global Catholic Climate Movement.
Yes.
They're working too on what is generally called just transition, and so this is oh, and there's a third thing that I guess gives me hope is, and if anybody wants to read and I'm going to put my camera on just because I would hope that you also hate to see a black box talk at you. That Arundhati Roy wrote early on in the pandemic a beautiful article called "The Pandemic is a Portal." And what I would like us to work on, and I believe this is really at the heart of the third reconstruction also, and also, and together with that Laudato Si, that we can make this transition out of the pandemic an opportunity for transformation of the economy. And so that's those are I highly recommend Arundhati Roy's article, "Pandemic is a Portal." I think about it frequently, that this is the way to emerge this third reconstruction really is a kind of a revolution. They don't want to call it that because it makes people crazy, but a third reconstruction of the economy, and a focus on the poor, including, of course, the environment, which is one of the major pillars of the Poor People's Campaign, the ecological devastation, and militarism, challenging militarism, which is something that we hear in Appalachia, the Appalachian women, who I call, where we have here a wall of women duking it out with the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, where I think we can get her done. These I think are the movements that we need to support. They're interfaith, interracial. By the way, another hopeful thing about Laudato Si is I work a lot with other faith groups, United Religions Initiative. And the Catholic Church is way behind the Episcopals and the Methodists, you know, when it comes to admiration for Pope Francis and Laudato Si. Using Laudato Si as a blueprint, I consider it to be a fabulous blueprint for the transformation of the economy. Again, I mean, if you've studied it, you know that Laudato Si says hundreds of times the preferential treatment of the poor, the concern for the poor. This is where the Third Reconstruct, the Poor People's Campaign and Laudato Si meet, and it's wonderful, and I think.
Whoop. Looks like we
Looks like our
lack
audio.
lack of bandwidth. Well, until Linda comes back, maybe that. I'd like to go back to. The Poor People's Campaign is wonderful, huh? But Linda was saying they work with Anthony. I think any platform you can give to Anthony to help to amplify his voice, that would be one thing. The second thing is this idea of eco-villages or community, really rural regeneration is the larger framework. Paquita and I are involved with some of my former students who, hi Linda, I guess we lost you for a little bit there, but you're back, okay. And we're trying to create an eco-village in North Central Florida. And we've been held back quite a bit because of COVID, because you couldn't travel around. But one of my former students, her father owned one of the largest housing development corporations in Miami. And she's very deeply into ecology, and she's LEED certified and all this stuff. And so we're working with her. And I originally asked her, I said, well, you think we can do this? And she says, oh yeah, don't worry. They'll be investors. And she said, and I said, oh really? But she keeps saying, I have the investors. So I think she is the investor, but I think we have the funds for it. We just have to go ahead and do it. And so we're looking on that. But the eco-village principle and what Anthony's doing, I think is very important, because I hope I'm wrong, but I think the collapse of industrial civilization is closer to us rather than further away, sooner rather than later. I mean, the kind of civilization we're living in now, just see it with these cyber attacks. It would take very little to shut down the food system, shut down the energy grid. We could suddenly find ourselves with having difficulties getting food, you know, and medical care, all kinds of things. So the idea of the eco-village, it would be relatively self-reliant and generating its own energy, generating its own food with organic horticulture and permaculture and stuff. So these might be strategies for survival, I think. I mean, you know, we're talking when civilizations crash, a lot of people die. The disruption and the violence is incredible. You know, after the fall of the Roman Empire, we had these, you know, warlords, which were the whole, out of which the whole feudal system arose for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that one of the things I think the churches could do and labor unions could do too is begin to create places where people can live and survive. And to get a leg up on that early on, I think would be very important. So that's one thing I want. And the other, I wanted to share one other thing with it. Maybe CCA could be linked to this. There's an organization Paquita and I helped co-found that grew out of meetings with Tom Berry in Assisi, Italy, that we're involved with. 6 or 7 meetings in the 1990s, and then we regenerated that in 2017 and 2018. We had gatherings in Assisi around Laudato Si and St. Francis of Assisi, his vision, and eco-spirituality and the ideas of Tom Berry. And it's called the Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network. We're moving very slowly developing it, but one of the things I hope we can do is include organizational members in the very near future. So that's something maybe CCA could be a part of. If I could share the screen, I'll just share the website with you here. This is it here. Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network. And we're especially oriented toward young people to build up young leaders. That's the mission. We do interviews with people. We got our founding president, Drew Mearns, wonderful guy, a lawyer, and an internationally famous sports coach, just died tragically of cancer. Geraldine Essina is a Native American from Chile and and her husband is a spiritual leader in central Mexico, and so on. So you can maybe see, you want to see some of the things down here. I've had a lot of events, 2 Assisi meetings. We've had a lot of local meetings since then. Pachimanteras Press, the one that the Pax Romana, my organization, started. We've been publishing a lot of these books. These are in Hindu and various religions and stuff. This one is about law. A colleague, Elisabetta Ferrero, Tom Berry's journey in Italy. Elisabetta and Paquita and I accompanied them there. And if you have any books you want to get published, let me know that are in this vein. Organizations. These are the people who have been sponsors for our meetings. This is a Center for Earth Ethics, which is Corinna Gore, who was Al Gore's daughter, was a co-convener for the 217 conference. And so we've had a lot of the Earth. We've all been very deeply involved with the Earth Charter, with Mary Evelyn Tucker, the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, and so on and so on. This is my organization. And then this was the 2018 conference. There is some talk of possibly another conference in 2022 in Assisi. We're not sure about that. Anyway, that I share that with you. It really grew out of the work that St. Thomas University, where Elisabetta Ferrero and I were co-philosophy professors, that organization. But that's something. The website is spirituality or sustainability-spirituality.net. So that's something I hope we can begin to develop a wider network. But maybe CCA could create an ecological village. Who knows? If we get it right, get something going up in North Florida, I'm sure what my former student, who came back to school in her 30s, Raisa Marrero Rodriguez is her name, but she's saying this should be a prototype for others that could be generated. She wants to show that, there's all kinds of housing developments being built all the time. Why couldn't they be eco-villages? They don't cost anymore, and actually they'd be cheaper to live in and much better quality of life as well. So Rice is very interested in having this one be a prototype, and that then it could be, she would want, and we actually have a website. What's the name? It's called Peace on Earth Eco Villages. Let me see if I can find it here, just a minute. The name of it's a newer website. It was just changed. Let me share the screen again here. I'll just share that with you.
While you're looking for that, Joe, there's one comment in the chat from Carol that said, I'd like to recommend an intriguing book, The Ministry for the Future. It's a novel, but the author is a scientist, and many of his possible ideas for dealing with climate change are real and available. The novel talks a lot about gaining political will and shows some possibilities. Very engaging, and it's by Kim Stanley Robinson.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Kim Stanley Robinson. Well, we have all these technologies to do it, and we do have the political will, but there are powerful, powerful forces blocking it. That's what Anthony found. Once he got beyond the county level, state legislatures, and here it is here. State legislators and then the national legislature are blocking. This is our website for the Peace on Earth Eco Villages. It's still a work in progress. We're still conceiving it and designing a business plan. But we've been talking to people in several counties, and we want about 80 to 100 acres, ideally with water, a river, or a lake on it or something. So this is the, I won't go over it all. This was my sketch of an ecological house. So but we have I see the development of a global network of regenerative eco-villages as planting seeds for an alternative global ecological civilization, and also providing new living spaces for the millions of people who will become or are already becoming climate change refugees. All of South Florida is going to be underwater, all of South Florida, from the ecological devastation increasingly inflicted upon our planetary life system by late modern industrial civilization. And the three people, this is Raisa. She's the, here, this is Raisa. She's a dynamo. She speaks 4 or 5 languages. She got several graduate degrees, and she's just wonderful. And she was the operations manager for this big housing development corporation. So in addition to having access to capital, she knows how to build it as well. And Susan Alvarez Vigneta is a third person with us, and she's a chiropractor. And at the heart of the Eco Village, we want to have a wellness center, and so here's the more stuff about the vision. So if you want to see Peace on Earth ecovillages.org, so you might begin thinking about an eco village for Appalachia, a CCA eco village for Appalachia, so and those are the kind of projects I think we have to construct. We have to begin now to create the seeds of an alternative civilization. Certainly, it's important to fight legislatively against the lobbyists who will try to block what we're trying to do. But at the same time, we have to go ahead now. That's what Peter Morin said, to plant the seeds of a new civilization within the shell of the old. He called it a society. To plant seeds of a new society within the shell of the old. It's already falling apart, but don't wait for it to fall down. Let's start. It's an organic metaphor. Let's plant the seeds and they will grow. They will grow up and they will sprout, like a mustard seed.
I have a sort of a selfish question, sort of underdeveloped, so bear with me, but I think that I'm probably the youngest person on this call. I'm 30 years old and I'm getting married this fall and looking to start a family within the next couple of years. And especially looking at that photo that you shared at the beginning, the photo of all of you, that you said you may have been from the second pastoral, but still looking back at that, looking back at the time when all of you were gathering and writing this visionary prophetic document about the future. I just wish that I could, be a fly on the wall when that happened. But I guess my question is something akin to, are you satisfied now with the impact that document has had, and going from here into the future, for me as a young person, what do you have any advice on looking, to the next?
Oh, great question, Sarah. And first of all, I think everything we must do, and this is what the Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network, because most of us are quite old, everything we must do must be at the service of young people and young families. That's really our mantra, I would say this, I'm so grateful to have lived through the 60s and the 70s. They were just extraordinary times and so hopeful, so exciting. But I have to say, we were very naive, very naive. We didn't know what we were up against. And there was a counter revolution, a very violent one across the planet. Many people were assassinated, things were destroyed, and alternative forces were put in power. And they really redesigned the world in a very vicious way, I think. I think different than what we did as young people, you need to have a whole community together. That's why we see these eco villages as especially for young families. It takes a village to raise not just a child, to raise a family. It takes a village, I would say, to be a family. I often say the so-called modern nuclear family, that's not correct. it's the traditional nuclear family rather is a modern invention, and it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. The extended family, the joke I often tell is that the Miami is heavily Cuban, and the Cuban immigrants come up to customs and immigration, and the immigration officer says to them, this guy there with his wife and talking, and his wife, he's talking, his wife and children are there, and they say, he says, and did you bring your family? And he says, no. Well, who are these? They said, well, that's just my wife and children. Everybody else is back in Cuba, And we joke when we go to Puerto Rico to see Paquita's family. She has 32 first cousins, and there's 500 in the family. So, and they used to say, oh, you're so lucky you get to go to the beach all the time. I said, we never get to the beach. We have so many relatives to visit, but it's wonderful, And even the kids, when we took our kids down there, and when we have taken our grandchildren, they're just in awe of this huge family system. And that's one of the beautiful things of the Latin tradition. They kept the family alive. Most of my students who would be Latin American now in Miami, they were from all over Latin America, but mostly from Latin America. And every single one of them whose family, some of them were just coming up from Latin America to go to school, but others they moved there, the family. So they practically every one of them would say, every Sunday we have dinner, the whole family at my grandmother's house. That was the big thing every Sunday. So so if we don't have our extended family around us, we can recreate family in a voluntary way through begin to create village life that then will grow into extended families. I think people would stay there. So I think that would be the piece of advice. You have to, I would say, you need a community, and you need a community which is not just on the consumer side of life, but it has to be on the producer side. And it would be what is now called an eco-village, but it's really the way humans lived until the Industrial Revolution. The vast majority, 99% of them probably, prior to the Industrial Revolution. Now, in a very short space of time, we put everybody into cities, and we've hyper-individualized the society. And it's absurd. I mean, China has, oh my goodness, they've destroyed thousands of years of village life and put everybody in these humongous cities, and it's and of course, and then they had a rule for one child. They didn't even need the rule, because in the cities it was financially impossible for the people to have more than one child. They're struggling to survive, So yeah, that would be my piece of advice. Think about creating an eco-village. I'll put you in touch with Raisa if you want afterwards, and
Perfect.
It's possible to do. Developers are building developments all over the place, all over the time, so.
That's good advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Linda had commented in the chat when we were talking about climate refugees. She said that Appalachia, which is rarely affected by hurricanes and tornadoes, will be where climate refugees come and are already coming. She also added a link to laudatosiactionplatform.org. So feel free to check that out, everyone.
Wonderful.
We're almost at time. Joe, I'm happy to let you, kind of have any final words to share with us before.
Well, maybe, as I think Linda was saying, get the Laudato Si network, and you mentioned too, I just graduated last night as a Laudato Si animator. So if you go to the Global Catholic Climate Movement's website, you can sign up for the next round to become a Laudato Si animator. And that's only the first step. They're building a global movement. It's a little mechanical for my taste, but it's still very, very good. And I think it's very promising. And it's wonderful. I mean, I was practically the only person from the United States there. People from all over the world. And I would say there were about 90% women. That's not surprising, huh? But from all over Asia, Africa, Latin America, wonderful people. And they're putting all these people through this formation program. And this animator thing is just the first stage of the formation program. And then they're forming Laudato Si study circles for study and prayer. And then they're forming larger regional chapters of Laudato Si, which includes membership by organizations. Here would be something to maybe Catholic Committee of Appalachia could work with the Catholic Global Climate Network to form a chapter of the, and I would let my Pax Romana group become an organizational member of it, and maybe the Catholic Global Climate Network could become a member of that chapter too, because they're open to working with other religions. That would be a wonderful idea, to explore linking CCA to the Catholic Global Climate Movement, and maybe even forming, because I don't see too much. I mean, the Catholic bishops are it's very sad what's going on with the Catholic bishops in the United States. It's there's no hope there, no hope, and so we can't expect much leadership from the institution. But CCA could become a rising leader in this thing by hooking up with the Catholic Global Climate Network and building outward from there. My final thought.
Thank you for that. We love to have kind of an action step be our last thought. So thank you so much for that. Just a couple of reminders. This speaker series continues next month on July 8th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. with Carol Warren, who's with us this evening, speaking about At Home in the Web of Life. It's the same Zoom link. So if you have the Zoom link to enter this event, you'll use the same link next month to join that. Feel free to contact Jeannie or I with any questions. I'll put my contact information in the chat, so anyone is welcome to get in touch with me with any questions or thoughts. Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing with us and educating us, and I see some applause. Thank you so much. If I may, I was just going to conclude with just the final couple of paragraphs of The Telling Takes Us Home. Dear sisters and brothers, we urge all of you not to stop living, to be a part of the rebirth of utopias, to recover and defend the struggling dream of Appalachia itself. For it is the weak things of this world which seem like folly that the Spirit takes up and makes its own. The dream of the mountain struggle, the dream of simplicity and of justice, like so many other repressed visions, is, we believe, the voice of the Lord among us.